Hari Om. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, this Halloween. So I'm very happy to be with you to share some thoughts about one of my most favorite subjects, which is pranayama. Pranayama is especially dear to me because I received private one-on-one instruction from my guru, Swami Karunananda, in my pranayama practice. And it was something he specifically told me to focus on. And it has literally been a lifesaver for me in many, many ways. So it's one practice I'm totally devoted to. You know, we have some practices that maybe are negotiable. We get up in the morning and we start negotiating with what we feel is important for us to do in the day. And some things come to the top of that list and other things sort of drift down toward the bottom of the list. For me, pranayama and meditation are at the very top, non-negotiable. Swami Satchidananda used to say, never skip pranayama and meditation. They are food for the soul. If you don't have a lot of time, do some asanas one day, some asanas the next, but always leave time for some relaxation, pranayama, and meditation. So why is pranayama so important? If you think about it a little bit, the first moment of life begins with that first inspiration of breath as we emerge from the womb. And for the duration of our life, the breath is our constant companion till that final expiration. It's a powerful ally that can lead us to optimal health, mental and emotional clarity, balance, and well-being. And not only that, it's a gateway and a powerful tool to go beyond the physical and the mental emotional planes and experience the highest reality, what we can call self-realization, God realization, that supreme peace and joy, which is our true nature. Breath is the primary indication of life. If you're walking down the road and you see someone lying there, what is the first question you ask? You don't say, I wonder if he's digesting well. You don't say, I wonder if he had a good elimination today. You don't ask even, is his heart beating? The first thing that comes to mind that we normally ask is he or she breathing? That is the primary indication of life. There are three possible relationships that we can have with the breath. We can observe it, we can direct it, or we can regulate it. Observing the breath is a very popular and effective meditation technique. And you can use 3 subtle inner senses in the process of observing the breath. You can watch it as it moves up and down the spine. You can watch it as it moves in and out the nostrils. You can even watch the movement of the abdomen that enables it to enter and then depart from the body. So there's the inner visual watching of the breath. You can also feel the breath when you develop a finer inner sense, inner tactile sense. You can feel the breath as it moves up and down the spine, piercing through the sushumna, the subtle canal within our spinal column, and as it pierces the various chakras or centers of spiritual consciousness. You can feel the breath as it moves from the crown of the head, as it goes down the spine and gently strikes the base and then returns upward. And the final way we can use the breath as a meditation practice is listening to the subtle sound that the breath creates within us. This is sometimes referred to as soham, which in Sanskrit can be translated as I am he referring to the all-pervasive spirit or Lord of creation. So continually throughout the day, every minute of our life, approximately 21,600 times a day, the breath is affirming our unity, our oneness with the divine. So as we inhale, hum as we exhale. Meditating on the breath is powerful because the breath is the only modality that's always in the now. Our body is the product of the past. Our mind fluctuates between past and future and intermittently lands on the present moment. But the breath is unique in that it's always in the moment. I can't, for example, say, I'm going to be very busy at 5 o'clock today. I don't want any of my energy being distracted or diverted anywhere else. So I'm going to do a lot of Bhastrika Pranayama now, build up a lot of prana within me so I don't have to breathe later. You can't do it. The breath is always in the now. So what does that mean? When we use the breath as a meditation focus, instantly the mind is brought into the now. Why is that helpful? If we're always in the now, we will experience that higher consciousness because our mind will become steady, calm, clear. Also, even before we reach that supreme state, being in the now frees us from most suffering in life. If you reflect a little, it becomes clear that suffering is the result of 2 basic mental functions: memory and anticipation. Thinking about what happened before, thinking about what will happen possibly in the future. If we stay in the now, there's a grace that flows from that gives us the capacity to cope and deal with things that we can't possibly do if we're dealing with them based on anticipation or imagination. It's a mystery, but it is a fact. A French philosopher named Fenelon from the 16th century once said, when God sends challenges, problems, trials, crises into the life, they come, as it were, prepackaged, this is my wording, with sufficient grace to sustain us. But the problems we create for ourselves through anticipation, imagination, exaggeration, there's no grace to sustain us through that. For that, we're on our own. So being in the now keeps us focused. When the mind becomes focused, it gains tremendous power, and it has the capacity to skillfully deal with whatever is unfolding before us. So we can observe the breath with 3 subtle inner senses. We can direct the breath. This is where pranic healing comes into play. And we often discuss this when we explore the science of pranayama. Pranayama involves controlling, regulating, and ultimately mastering the breath. So in pranic healing, we are directing, controlling, and regulating the flow of the breath. The reason this is possible is because the breath and the mind share what you can call a reciprocal relationship. Prana, or energy, powers the thoughts in our mind. And the reverse is also true. Our mind can tell the energy where to go. So energy moves thought, and thought moves energy. And we use this principle in pranic healing. Pranic healing can happen to oneself. It can be done at a distance if one has developed enough prana within oneself and has that capacity to transmit it. It can be done to ourselves. It can be done for others. It's a very delicate thing, though, when we start considering transferring energy for healing for others, because we can be sort of inadvertently letting our own egos slip into the process. And that could be not helpful for both the recipient of your efforts and even more so for you as well. So pranic healing is a very interesting, very deep subject. Even Swami Satchidananda in his life, in his early years as a monk, he prayed for the power of healing, and he received it. And he would heal people all the time. And he got a reputation for that. So more and more people would come to receive his healing gift. And at a certain point, the same people who he had healed came back again, exhibiting more problems. And what he realized was the people weren't changing the habits that created the problems in the first place. So they were just getting into a never-ending cycle. So he changed what he did. And what he did was, instead of saying, I'm going to heal you, he would give people different practices, different techniques to do, different dietary guidelines. Does this sound like what Margabandhu does for all of you? And so by their efforts, they themselves would purge the karma that was the cause for the problem. And then quietly, without any fanfare, he would offer his prayers as well. So he would back their efforts, but they weren't depending on him for a quick fix. The way pranic healing is done, you can visualize any natural form of energy. It can be air, it can be water, fire, light, blessings flowing from a holy sage. You can picture it when you're in that peaceful state in deep relaxation, flowing, entering you through the top of the head, flowing down the body, exiting through the soles of the feet. And as the energy courses through your body, if there's a problem anywhere, you gently direct the energy there and tell it, do your healing work. And then the problems are carried out away from the body through the soles of the feet. It can also be done with breathing. It's very effective with alternate nostril breathing. You can breathe in tremendous amounts of energy from an infinite cosmic source. Feel it suffuse. Feel it fill every cell, every atom, every tissue, every organ of your body. Tell it to perform its healing work. And then as you exhale, release all the toxins, all the tensions, all the problems in the body. It is extremely effective, extremely effective. So that's directing the energy. And the final way we can relate to the breath, the main topic of our discussion today, is the science of pranayama, in which we seek to control all the energy currents within us by regulating the breath. Let's start with the word pranayama. Prana is the vital energy that permeates and animates the entire creation. Wherever you see energy, wherever you see motion, it is an expression of prana. So you think of the earth rotating on its axis, revolving around the sun. That's thanks to prana. Think of the waves of the ocean flowing in and out, prana. The wind blowing through the leaves of the tree, that's due to prana. A car riding down the road, it's prana in the form of electricity or gasoline that's powering that car. Bring it close to home. I can do this because of prana. Think of all the motion that occurs within the body. You have digestion, elimination, respiration, the movement of the heart, movement of the lungs, movement of nerve currents to and from the brain, cell metabolism. So much activity, all the enzymes, all the hormones being released and coursing through your system. All that motion is powered by prana. We'll go to the next subtle level, the mind. As I mentioned briefly a moment ago, even the movement of thoughts through your mind is powered by prana. In the yogic thinking, thoughts are not nothing. They're actually entities. They consist of subtle material, and the prana within, the subtle prana, is what powers the thoughts through the mind. If you studied any Raja Yoga, you know the goal is to stop the thoughts from coursing through the mind. Make the mind still. And if we can do that, if we can still all the waves, the mind becomes like a beautiful, pristine lake, and you can see to its very depths and experience the peace and truth of who you are, your own higher self. It's very, very difficult to stop the activity of thoughts in the mind. I think that's something most of you already know about if you're at this workshop. If I just challenged you for the next 5 minutes not to think the word hippopotamus, who's thinking it again now? Anyone? The question is, what is the likelihood you would be thinking it if I didn't mention it? Probably 0. Excuse me, can you rotate? Probably 0. But the mind is like this. As soon as you tell it not to do something, it's the first thing it wants to do. It's the first thing it looks to do. It's very difficult to control the mind. So how is pranayama helpful in this regard? Energy is grosser than thought. It's easier to control a grosser thing than a more subtle thing. Prana is needed to power the thoughts through the mind. If we can gain control of the prana that's moving the mind, then we can gain control of the thoughts in the mind. So, ayama means control, regulation, and mastery. We gain control of our inner physiology when we gain mastery over the pranic currents within. This will give us optimal health and vitality. And even more importantly, from a yogic perspective, we can gain control ultimately of the thoughts that go through our mind and experience the highest realization. So pranayama is an extraordinary gift we can give ourselves for physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. One of the reasons that pranayama is so effective, if you know anything about the koshas, the 5 sheaths, the maya koshas that surround the light within, we have the physical, the vital, the mental, emotional, the intellectual, and then what we call the bliss body. 5 levels, ever more gross, emanating from the center, of material substance that surrounds the light within. We want to experience that light. All those layers need to be purified, strengthened, harmonized, aligned. The important thing to note is that between the outermost or physical level and the mental, emotional level lies the energetic or vital or pranic level. The Pranamaya kosha, we say, lies midway between the Annamaya kosha, the physical level, and the Manomaya kosha, the emotional, mental, reactive, habit-oriented level, the desiring level of the mind. So what does that mean? It means when you work with the prana, not only do you affect the energy within your system, but you also affect the two sort of adjacent levels, the physical and the mental, emotional. So you get sort of a threefold level of benefit. And then since all the levels get aligned, you get the ultimate benefit as well. So just want to clarify why we work with the breath in order to gain control of the pranic currents within. The amazing thing about the breath, actually two amazing things about the breath, is that first, the breath reflects everything that's happening within us physiologically and psychologically. And we can, by regulating the breath, affect everything that's happening within us physiologically and psychologically. The breath, you can say, is the vehicle or the expression of all these subtle energy movements, all the pranic forces within. So it's reflecting it, and by working with it, you can impact it in very precise, deliberate ways. Secondarily, of all our physiological functions, the breath is the only one that is both voluntary and involuntary. If you don't give it any thought whatsoever, it will just keep going. Some higher force keeps sending it back as long as we have a job to do here on this earthly plane. But at any moment, if we wish, we can intervene on that automatic process and manipulate the breath however we wish. We can speed it up. You can hold it. You can expand and lengthen it. So what we do in essence is we take hold of the voluntary accessibility of the breath, and we use that as a gateway to access the involuntary background and access that part of the brain where involuntary functions occur, or better say, so-called involuntary functions, because you can attain mastery over them. It's like these yogis we read about who get into a state of hibernation for months on end. A barely detectable heartbeat remains. And then at the appointed hour, they emerge. They have that much control over their physiology. And what they can do, we could do too, if we put in the practice. What happens is, by learning how to control the breath, you gain control over the motion of the lungs. When you have mastered the motion of the lungs, this gives you control over the heart. When you gain control over the heart, you can gain access to the vagus nerve of the parasympathetic nervous system. That nerve emanates from the base of the brain, where other so-called involuntary functions emerge from. Things like heart rate, blood pressure, blood flow, and respiration. You tap into that part of the brain that controls those functions, and you gain control over the so-called automatic physiology within. So because the breath reflects everything and can be used to impact it, and because you can take hold of the voluntary side of it to gain access to involuntary functions, we use the breath to master all the pranic forces within, all the pranic forces within. So, breathing, according to the yogis, should be done through the nose, unless you're trying to cool your body. The nose performs functions that the mouth cannot. In particular, it filters, moisturizes, and warms the air. It gets the air into optimal condition to be utilized by the lungs. Swami Karunananda used to say, the nose is for breathing, the mouth is for eating. And one of his rules at the ashram was, if you are going to breathe through your mouth, then you have to eat through your nose. That's a good motivation not to be a mouth breather. Actually, if you are a mouth breather, it's really worth the effort to try to turn that around. Mouth breathing, because it doesn't clean the air in the same way, can make you more susceptible to getting ill. There's a kriya for cleaning the nose to make it a better instrument for pranayama and to help keep your health at top potential. It's called neti, jala neti, sutra neti. Jala, water, sutra, thread. And these days, depending on where you live, you have to be careful about the quality of the water that you use. If you have any doubts, boil it, cool it first, or use distilled water, and then use sea salt, non-iodized salt. A half teaspoon in a cup of water is physiological saline. It resembles the composition of your tears. This is good to do every day. You can either put some in your palm and sniff it up through the nose and then spit it out, or put it in the cup, close one nostril, insert the other, suck it up, let it come down, spit it out, then the other nostril, or you can use a neti pot and pour it one way, pour it the other way. This eliminates any debris, toughens the mucus blanket, helps to drain the sinuses. And if you're very adventurous, you can get either a rubber catheter, a thin one, to use to clean it that way. You hear of dental floss. This is like nasal floss. This is something you do at the most every couple of weeks, where you can make your own by getting some twine and some beeswax and dipping half of it in melted beeswax and then curving the end. So when you feed it in, when it comes to the throat level, you can reach back and readily pull it out. So they're very helpful techniques for supporting your health. Years ago, my first retreat was in Glen Rose, Texas. And we all lived in California, a group of us that went there. And on the way back, we had to be very careful not to avoid going through Mexico, because the people who had sponsored the retreat gave us a lot of fruit to take back with us that we could have on our journey that was going to take a few days. So we tried to be very careful, but then we accidentally got into Mexico. So there we are. There were a load of us in the van. Immediately the border guards came, had us get out, and taking one look at us, they got the dogs to sniff everything to see if we were carrying any contraband. They didn't find any contraband, but they did find the rubber catheters that people used for string netting. And they were about to take us off to a Mexican jail somewhere when one of the guys who was with us got inspired and he snatched that rubber catheter away from the guard and started stuffing it up his nose. And another fellow came over and started explaining Sutra Neti. So after that bizarre demonstration, the guards gathered in a corner and came back and said they didn't believe anyone could have made that up and done it on the spot. So they let us go, but unfortunately they confiscated all our fruit. But it was an interesting yoga story to recall many years later. Okay, some pointers. The very foundation of all pranayama practices is our simple 3-part deep breathing. Because it's so simple, don't underestimate the value of it. I once was at a talk that Swami Karunananda gave to a group of people dealing with AIDS and HIV. And the main thing he recommended to rebuild the immunity was simple 3-part deep breathing. Deep breathing has benefits on 5 levels. Number 1, it supercharges the lungs with air, oxygen, prana. 7 to 10 times as much oxygen and prana are taken into the system than in a normal, simple breath. This fills the body with additional energy. Also, in deep breathing, the lower lobes of the lungs get ventilated, which doesn't happen in the higher chest breathing that most people do. There's an ample blood supply there, so you get good exchange between the air in the lungs and the bloodstream. That helps to more effectively oxygenate the whole system and burn up toxins. So you get a benefit in the area of the lungs. You get a benefit for the heart. Heart disease is caused when the muscle doesn't get sufficient oxygen. What this does is it increases the oxygen level of the blood. Also, when you do 3-part deep breathing, engaging the diaphragm, the heart gets a massage. The pericardium that surrounds the heart shares a surface with the diaphragm. As the diaphragm is engaged, the heart is pulled down and a massaging action occurs. As you all know, anything that is massaged gets toned. Anything toned improves in function. Also, all the organs in the abdominal region, through deep diaphragmatic breathing, they also get toned at that time. Thirdly, for the heart, the vena cava is the vessel that returns blood to the heart. It pierces the diaphragm. When you breathe diaphragmatically, the vena cava gets massaged, and due to that massaging action, it repeatedly expands. It's like it dilates, and the blood flow back to the heart is assisted. Another thing that's benefited by simple 3-part deep breathing is stress reduction. We're all very familiar with stress. First thing that happens when we get stressed, our breathing changes. It can become accelerated. It can become shallow. Simple 3-part deep breathing can restore mental and physiological balance, take you off from the brink, bring you back to a balanced state. Also, when you breathe high in the chest, which we call chest breathing, which most people these days do, you keep the abdomen a little tight and you breathe high. This is actually part of the fight or flight syndrome. It's like you're in the jungle, you see the wild animal, you get geared up for action, the breath goes high in the chest, the eyes become dilated, digestion shuts down. Instead, all the energy is diverted to the limbs so you can run and move and do what needs to be done to get safe. Most of us function in that mode all the time because we're breathing that way. If we switch constantly to always be taking diaphragmatic 3-part breathing, we move into another mode of functioning. We diffuse that fight or flight reaction. And finally, with respect to stress, simply taking a deep breath has an extraordinary effect in the body. You know how when we take a deep breath and we go, it's like everything relaxes. There are stretch receptors in the lungs. When they get fully expanded, they send an electrical signal to the hypothalamus in the brain. The brain gets the signal, I'm fully expanded. So then the brain sends back a signal that says, okay then, just relax. Simply taking a deep breath will do that. it will cause this relaxation response. Another thing about the breath, the lymph system, major part of our immunity comes from a healthy, functioning lymph system. The lymph doesn't have a pump like the heart does. So how does the lymph get circulated through the body? Through muscular effort, through inversion, and through breathing. Simple, deep breathing will pump your lymph effectively, boosting your immunity. And the next major area where just doing deep breathing is so helpful is elimination of wastes, detoxifying your entire system. We have 4 ways we eliminate wastes: sweat, feces, urine, and breathing. The only one that we do all the time is breathing, which is very fortunate because otherwise we would be a very disgusting species, I would say. But fortunately, the only one that's going on all the time is breathing. So we can reduce that toxification that happens in our system by simply making the breathing more efficient and more effective. Pranayama has something for every condition, every purpose. It has rapid breathing techniques to heat the system, to help flush waste from the body, to improve the metabolism. The rapid breathing with retention, which we call Bhastrika, is the absolute best practice for building up and strengthening the entire respiratory system. We have cooling breaths that are good in the summer. Sitali, Sitkari. This is the only time you breathe through the mouth because you don't want that heating effect. They not only help you to overcome heat, they are also supposed to help you to overcome thirst, hunger, and sleep. So if ever you have a need to forego food, sleep, and drinking, remember these techniques, especially Sitali, where you form the tongue into a tube and you breathe through that tube. They can also be helpful, Sitali and Sitkari, for bringing down a fever. Fevers are the body's way to try to heal you by burning up unwanted pathogens. But if a fever has gone too high too long, you can use these cooling breaths to help bring the fever down. Also, if there's any hyperactivity or hyperacidity in the system, cooling breaths can be helpful. They're contraindicated if there's too much mucus, too much congestion, too much constipation in the system, then in general, you don't do cooling breaths. And then for balancing the system, the best thing, your alternate nostril breathing, either Nadi Suddhi or Sukha Purvaka, if you've worked up to retention. When energy flows through the right nostril, it increases blood flow and electrical activity in the left hemisphere of the brain. When you breathe through the left nostril, it increases blood flow and electrical activity in the right hemisphere of the brain. When you alternate the nostrils, you balance both hemispheres of the brain. This has physiological and very subtle effects. There's an ancient subtle science of the breath called Swata Yoga. And the yogis who developed this studied nostril flow in particular. And what they realized was right nostril flow heats the body and brings out the more active and masculine side of the personality, the more outgoing, assertive, logical, sequential, mathematical, verbal, excelatory to the organs of the body, that sort of side of us. When we breathe through the left nostril, it enhances the feminine side of us, the more receptive, intuitive, reflective, holistic, calming to the organs, spatial, nonverbal side of our personalities. When we do alternate breathing, we harmonize and balance the different subtle motivators and aspects of our inner psyche and personality. So I'd say in particular for healing, the best regimen, this is what was recommended by Swami Satchidananda, 3 sittings a day, and you work up to 30 minutes per sitting. Generally, the 2 techniques that are focused on are rapid breathing, followed by alternate nostril breathing. Rapid breathing helps to burn up and eliminate any impurities. Alternate nostril breathing helps to take the energy that's generated and balance it in the system. Helps it to get integrated in your system. So 3 to 5 rounds of rapid breathing, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of alternate nostril breathing. This regimen is also the best preparation for meditation. The breath and the mind go together. If one is agitated, the other is agitated. If one is calm, the other is calm. Difficult to calm the mind directly, but we can use the breathing, which is easier to manipulate, to calm the mind. So the same thing, 3 to 5 rounds of rapid breathing to make the mind alert, followed by 5 to 10 minutes of alternate breathing to make the mind calm and focused. Best regimen for healing, best regimen as preparation for meditation. And I'll just make one final point about how to build and deepen your practice. The key to building your practice has to do with your nadi suddhi, your alternate nostril breathing. This is called nadi suddhi. Nadi refers to the subtle tubes within the body. The yogis tell us there are 72,000 through which the prana flows. We have arteries, capillaries, and veins for blood. We have nerve channels for physical nerve transportation. We have neurons that are triggered. And for prana, we have subtle tubes made of astral matter. Suddhi means purification. Nadi suddhi purifies the tubes through which the pranic current flows. What you do is to build your nadi suddhi, First, you try to have smooth transitions between the nostrils. Then you try to make the exhalation longer than the inhalation. The quality of the exhalation is the most important thing in pranayama. It is emphasized even more than the retention. In fact, you can't have a good benefit unless the exhalation is smooth and finely regulated. That's where the power comes. So you begin extending the exhalation, learning how to do that. Then you make the exhalation twice as long as the inhalation, and you can mentally count as you do it. And it's good to say Om between the numbers as you count to get a more accurate second count. So if you counted to Om 1, Om 2, Om 3, Om 4, Om 5 for the inhalation, you would count to Om 10 for the exhalation. You stay at a given count till you can do it comfortably for 20 breaths in a sitting. When you can do that, you up the count by 1. So if you're doing 5-10, you increase to 6-12. You stay there till you can do 20 breaths in a sitting. Then you rise to 7-14. You keep building that way slowly. It can take years for some people till you reach 10-20. When you can do 20 breaths comfortably in a sitting at a 10-20 count, it's a general indication that your nadis have been sufficiently purified and strengthened to withstand the additional pressure that retention will put on your system. And remember, the prana current goes between the physical and the mental emotional. You don't want to strain or overburden those pranic tubes, because if you do, it will impact both your physical health and your mental, emotional balance. So you build slowly, and then you have tremendous benefit, tremendous benefit. So I see I'm coming to the end of my hour. I'd like to